I'm 81 years old, and I missed my chance to reconcile with my mother. She's been gone for 23 years now, and I still think about the last thing I said to her. It wasn't cruel.
It wasn't dramatic. It was small, dismissive. I told her I was busy and I'd call next week. At my age, you start counting things differently, not in years ahead, but in years behind.
I don't tell this story because I need forgiveness. I've lived too long to expect that. I'm telling it because time does something strange. It erases excuses and leaves only the truth.
And the truth is, I thought I had more time with her. When I was young, my mother and I were close in the way people used to be close without saying it out loud. She packed my lunches, sat at the kitchen table while I did homework, ironed my shirts even when I told her she didn't have to. She was not a loud woman. She didn't give speeches. She showed love by remembering how you liked your eggs. But she also had a sharp tongue, especially with me. I was her only son, and she worried in ways that felt like criticism. If I came home late, she'd say I was reckless. If I quit a job, she'd say I lacked patience. When I told her I wanted to move to another state in my 20s, she asked why I was always running. I wasn't running. I was trying to build something. I moved anyway. I got married at 27. We bought a small house with thin walls and a leaky roof. I worked long hours at a manufacturing plant, then later in management. I told myself I was doing what a man was supposed to do: provide, improve, move forward. My mother called every Sunday evening at 7:30, like clockwork. At first, I answered every time. We talked about small things, the weather back home, which neighbor had moved, what she'd planted in the yard. She'd ask about my wife, about work. But somewhere in my mid-30s, those calls began to feel like interruptions. I'd be tired or halfway through dinner or watching television. Sometimes I'd let the phone ring and call back later. Sometimes I didn't. When I did answer, I kept it short. "Everything's fine, Mom. Yes, we're good. No, I don't need advice." She had opinions about everything: how we were raising our daughter, how often we visited, the kind of car I bought. I felt judged, even when she wasn't judging. I felt like I was still 15. So I pulled back. Not in a dramatic way, just a little at a time. We visited twice a year instead of 4, then once. I told myself flights were expensive, work was demanding, my daughter had school. All of that was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that being around her made me feel small again, like I hadn't quite become the man I wanted to be. And instead of telling her that, instead of having one uncomfortable conversation, I chose distance. Distance is quiet. It doesn't argue. It just stretches. In my 40s, the calls became less frequent. She stopped calling every Sunday. Sometimes weeks passed. I noticed, but I didn't ask why. When I did call, she sounded older, slower. She'd repeat herself, tell the same story about the neighbor's dog or the church raffle. I'd interrupt gently. "You told me that already, Mom." "Oh, I guess I did." I didn't mean to make her feel foolish, but I think I did. There were small moments I remember now with painful clarity. One Thanksgiving, she asked if we could come early so she could show my daughter some old photo albums. I said we'd see. We arrived late. I was irritated about traffic. The photo album stayed on the shelf. Another time, she mentioned a pain in her side, said it was probably nothing. I told her to see a doctor. She said she would. I didn't follow up. I assumed she would tell me if it was serious.
We always assume that. The real fracture came when I was 56. We had an argument on the phone. I don't even remember how it started. Something about my daughter choosing a college out of state.
My mother said she hoped I wouldn't lose her the way she'd lost me. I heard accusation. She probably meant fear. I said, "Mom, not everything is about you." There was silence on the line. Not the kind filled with static, the kind filled with something breaking. She said, "I know." I felt justified at the time. I was tired of feeling guilty for living my life. I told myself she needed to let go. We didn't speak for 3 months after that. Not out of a formal decision, just pride. I kept expecting her to call first. I think she expected the same. Then, one afternoon, my sister called. She said Mom had collapsed in the kitchen. They were taking her to the hospital. I remember the sound of my sister's voice, flat, controlled. I booked the earliest flight I could find, sat in that narrow seat, staring at nothing. I wasn't panicked, not yet. I told myself she was strong. She'd bounce back. She always had. At the hospital, she looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. Tubes, machines, her hair thin against the pillow. She was conscious when I walked in. She looked at me like she'd been waiting. I said, "Hi, Mom." That's what I chose. Not "I'm sorry," not "I love you," just "Hi, Mom." She smiled. It was weak, but it was real. We talked for maybe 20 minutes about nothing important. The nurses, the weather. She asked if the flight was smooth. I kept thinking there would be more time, that she'd recover enough for a real conversation, one where I'd say the things that had been building in my throat for years. I was wrong. She passed 2 days later, early morning. I missed it by 15 minutes. People tell you not to dwell on timing, that it wouldn't have changed anything. Maybe that's true, but I wanted to be there. I wanted her last memory to be of me saying something that mattered. Instead, my last clear sentence to her was about airplane turbulence. After the funeral, I went back to work within a week. I told myself staying busy was strength. I handled paperwork, sorted through her belongings, donated clothes, packed boxes. In one of those boxes, I found a stack of letters I had written her in my 20s, before email, before I got too busy. They were full of details, small jokes, questions about her garden. I sounded open, unarmored.
I couldn't remember when I'd stopped writing like that. The regret didn't hit all at once. It came in waves over the years, when my daughter moved away and didn't call as often as I'd hoped, when I caught myself repeating my mother's phrases, when I stood in my own kitchen at 70 and realized how quiet the house was. You think you're setting boundaries. You think you're protecting your independence. Sometimes you're just building walls you'll one day wish were doors. I replayed that argument from when I was 56 more than I care to admit. Not everything is about you. I said it like a verdict. Now I'm 81, and I understand something I didn't then. For parents who've poured their lives into their children, sometimes it is about them, not in a selfish way, in a longing way, in a way that says, "I still want to matter to you." I denied her that reassurance because I was tired of feeling pulled back into childhood. I didn't realize she wasn't trying to pull me back. She was trying to hold on. There's no dramatic ending to this story, no final letter she left behind saying she understood, no miraculous last-minute reconciliation. There's just a gap, an unfinished conversation. I visit her grave once a year now, not because I believe she hears me. I don't know what I believe about that anymore. I go because it's the only place where I allow myself to say the words out loud. I'm sorry I made you feel like a burden. I'm sorry I didn't call more. I did love you. The wind doesn't answer. What can't be fixed is simple. I can't pick up the phone. I can't redo that Sunday call. I can't step back into that hospital room and choose different words. Time doesn't negotiate. If you're listening to me and your mother is still alive, I won't tell you to call her tonight. I don't know your story. Not every relationship is safe or kind. I will say this. If there's something small and repairable between you, don't let pride convince you it's permanent. Most distance begins with something small. I thought reconciliation required a perfect moment, the right apology, the right mood. I was waiting for a clean opening. Life rarely gives you that. Sometimes it just gives you a Sunday evening at 7:30 and a ringing phone. I'm not telling you this to scare you. I'm telling you because at 81, I can see how ordinary my mistake was. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't abandonment. It was postponement. I postponed the conversation until there was no one left to have it with. Now I measure my days differently. I call my daughter, even when I don't have much to say. I try not to correct her when she repeats herself. I listen longer than feels efficient. It doesn't erase what I missed with my mother. Nothing does. But it softens the silence a little. If this story felt familiar to you, that's enough. Sit with it. Think about whoever came to mind while you were listening. As for me, I don't know how many more years I have. My hands shake when I button my shirt. I forget names sometimes. I move slower than I used to. But I remember her voice, clear as ever. And if I could have one ordinary Sunday evening back, just one, I wouldn't rush the call. I wouldn't glance at the clock. I wouldn't wait for a better time. I would let it ring once, and I would answer.